You're listening to People, Places, Planet, the official podcast of the Environmental Law Institute, a nonpartisan, nonprofit research and education institute making law work for people, places, and the planet. If you enjoy the podcast and want to support our work, consider donating at eli.org/donate.
Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of People, Places, Planet. I'm your host, Sebastian Duque Rios, and today we're taking a closer look at the many ways we use and depend on the ocean, how we manage its resources, protect its ecosystems, and navigate the competing interests that shape life at sea. Within that broad picture, we're zooming in on one issue that sits at the crossroads of conservation, economics, and international security: illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUU fishing. For this episode, we're particularly interested in looking at this topic from a climate change perspective. As fish populations shift across borders and resources become strained due to changes in oceanic conditions, the risk of conflict over fish at the local, regional, and international scale is rising. What does that mean for global stability? And how can cooperation across the law, science, and policy help us navigate these changes? To help us unpack these dynamics, I'm joined by Johan Bergenas, Senior Vice President for Oceans at the World Wildlife Fund, US, and Sofia O'Connor, Senior Attorney and Director of the Environmental Law Institute's Ocean Program. Johan, would you like to start by briefly introducing yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Johan Bergenas, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Oceans at the World Wildlife Fund in the United States. I've been here for about 5 years. Otherwise, my career has spanned areas of technology, international development, national and international security. I've had a fair amount of experience in technology and innovation, and always been a big fan of the Environmental Law Institute. Had the chance to work with you on marine protected areas, legal and regulatory guidance 10 years ago, and always thought that you fill a really important role in our community. So I've been with the World Wildlife Fund for about 5 years. I have dabbled across everything from security, development, conservation, technology. In my personal capacity, I have a wonderful family. We like to take advantage and explore nature. I grew up in Sweden originally and came here 25 years ago. And the other thing that I do for nature is that I have adopted 2 cats from the United Arab Emirates that we brought home about 10 years ago. So we do what we can in our professional and personal lives in the Bergenas family.
Hi, everyone. I am Sofia O'Connor. I am Senior Attorney and Director of the Ocean Program at the Environmental Law Institute. And so at the Ocean Program, we focus on a lot of different issues that are related to urgent ocean matters. We look at general ocean governance, sustainable fishing, marine protected areas, so conservation biodiversity, marine spatial planning, looking at other various issues that come up, including pollution and plastics more specifically. And one of our key areas is that we address those things that I just mentioned from the lens of climate change and marine tenure. So we support local stewardship and look at the legal frameworks to support rights to marine resources.
Hi, everyone. I am Sofia O'Connor. I am a Senior Attorney and Director of the Ocean Program at the Environmental Law Institute. At the Ocean Program, we work on a variety of issues, including those related to ocean governance, sustainable fishing, conservation of marine resources and biodiversity, marine spatial planning, climate change and coastal resilience, and marine tenure. We work on these issues, including those related to fisheries and marine conservation, in countries around the world, and I'm excited to join you for this podcast.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much for joining me today. And today we're going to be talking about marine conservation and its future broadly, but specifically maritime conflicts and the important role of IUU fishing in maritime conflict as well as conservation. And so to kick our conversation off, I wanted to ask, why is marine conservation important?
Marine conservation is really important for a number of reasons. You don't want to deplete the resources in the ocean that you have. The ocean supports basically life throughout the earth. And so we don't want to interfere with existing systems to the point where they stop working properly. And all the ocean ecosystem is diverse and very complex. And so we don't want to interfere with some parts because they can also affect other parts. And so you need to make sure that you have healthy ocean and healthy ecosystems And so you need to protect habitats and species to make sure that the ocean continues to function well.
It's a great way to frame it, Sophia. Personally, for me, I found that the oceans and the work we do here offers quite a bit of calm and serenity, even though there's a lot of issues with regards to its health. It offers me curiosity and inspires me when I see my colleagues and the broader conservation community working really hard on some of the world's thorniest problems. At the societal level, if you believe that it is important to regulate the world's climate, if you think that food security is important, if you want your country's or community's economy to grow, if you enjoy energy, or that you go to the doctor every now and again and you need some medicine, if those things are true for you, you are an oceans lover, because those are the things that the oceans, or at least healthy and resilient oceans, offer. Obviously, it takes resources and capacity to bring about those outcomes, but what's at stake here is really societal health or societal collapse, and that's why I think the oceans is a wonderful domain to work in.
That is beautifully put, Johan. I love that.
Agreed. Thank you both for putting it so well. And just to summarize it for our listeners, what are some of the most crucial threats that marine ecosystems are facing?
There are so many threats to the oceans right now, from poor fisheries management to illegal, unreported, and unregulated, or IUU fishing, to climate change, pollution, including plastics, destruction of habitats from harmful activities. I want to say these are some of the biggest threats, but really there are many challenges that the ocean is currently facing.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of good stuff there, Sophia. The one thing that I'll put a finer point to is that there's two things for me that really indicates that we're heading in the wrong direction here, or that some of the future threats. The first thing is we are not as careful and strategic as we need to be as we develop coastlines around the world. I understand that countries and communities need to build infrastructure, nurture their economies, invest in various different areas that is going to bring jobs and food and economic stability. But when we do that, when we build ports, when we build hotels, when we build energy installations, we need to be super careful about the coastal ecosystem that exists. If it's coral reefs, if it's blue forests like mangrove, seagrass, seaweed, these are natural barriers to protect infrastructure, to protect cities, to protect communities. And it is a fool's errand to think that development without a smart strategic plan, we call it a nature positive business plan, is going to do any good for your country. So development and not smart development is one part that I worry quite a bit about. The other piece, I think, is that one of the most critical resources that the world has, fish or seafood, is on the move as a result of changes taking place in the oceans. And so, as Sophia is an expert on, among other things, up to 25% of all fish stocks is going to move from one exclusive economic zone into another or into the high seas. And that's going to cause a series of winners and losers. And we're going to need organizations like ELI to figure out the legal regulatory frameworks for how to deal with a commodity that is on the move, so that we don't end up with winners and losers, and as a result, increased competition and conflict over this commodity.
Thank you both for providing that overview of the importance of conservation and some of the threats involved, including climate change impacts. So, as Johan alluded to, today we're going to be talking about that intersection between marine conservation and the national security issues that arise through movements in fish stock across exclusive economic zones, also known as EEZs, and the conflict that such movement and poor fishery management can cause. So, Johan, I want to get started with you. What exactly does it mean to work at this intersection between marine conservation and national security, and how are marine ecosystems connected to conflict?
Thank you. It's a great question. And the way I usually frame it is that if you're interested in this intersection, you join scholars and thinkers and doers that have been trying to manage this for about 6,000 years. Every country, every community, every empire have competed for resources. It's been a peace and security issue for centuries. If natural resources are managed well, it means peace and prosperity. If natural resources are not managed well, unfortunately, it means conflict and economic decline. And so we think it is important to recognize that ocean conservation has a clear and direct line to national security and geopolitics. And we've just released a report to that end, and it highlights three things. It highlights conflicts at the geopolitical level, which is that great powers and small powers as well are competing for fish because it's such an important resource for jobs and food, but also to exercise influence and power over other countries and communities. So there's a geopolitical dynamic to this issue, and it goes throughout history. Some countries are exercising petropower, meaning using fossil fuels to gain influence over certain parts of the world. And other countries are exercising pesca power, so influencing a country's behavior through making access to fish. So that's one component. The second component, which Sofia mentioned earlier in the conversation, is about transnational organized crime and criminals had infiltrated the broader seafood supply chain at most levels, and how that feeds all sorts of negative behavior and human suffering. And the third piece is connected to the second piece, which is economic security. If we don't take good care of our coastlines or seabeds or the health of the oceans, we are going to miss out on the tremendous opportunities that the blue economy offers in terms of food production, energy production, increase in economic viabilities for small and big countries. So those are the three areas where I think the health of the oceans and global and national stability and security interacts.
Great. Thank you, Johan. That's a really good entry point to this idea and this intersection between fields. Sofia, to move to you, I think Johan alluded to some of the impacts that everyday listeners could feel when it comes to changes in fish stock or maritime disputes. But to make it very clear for them, how could everyday people be affected by changes in fish stock or maritime disputes, even if they're far from the ocean?
Right. So if there's less fish in the ocean, it means less fish available in stores. Also, fish becomes more expensive. But also, another important point here is that, while some of us may only eat fish occasionally, for some other people, that's really what they depend on for their daily diet. And so decrease in the fish supply can really be detrimental to them. There are coastal communities who rely on small-scale fishers who rely on fish for both income and food. There are other communities for whom, fish is just such a part of their daily life that if there is less fish, that's really going to be hurting the communities. And I do want to tie it again to this lack of fish is climate related. Like a lot of this is climate related, as climate change negatively impacts fish populations and habitats, leading to less fish available for fishing. IUU fishing increases. Climate change also makes fish migrate to new locations. Scientists have noticed that fish migrating due to the changes in water temperatures and salinity and some other factors. And importantly, the fish is moving away from where fishers who rely on it expect to find it. And so this can cause fisheries management challenges as well as conflicts between different groups of fishers, but also fisheries managers. And of course, the scarcity of fish resources, it's also making IUU fishing a bigger problem, right? One problem is causing the other problem. IUU fishing is causing less fish, but also when there is less fish, IUU fishing might increase because some people might be less likely to report catch accurately, or there might be some others who just fish illegally. And so really all three of those problems are going together and making things worse.
Great. Thank you for bringing that home. And I think there's also something to be said about the value of fish to some communities culturally as well, right? And the importance that they play.
No, absolutely. Yes. Some communities really, it's important for their cultures. There's kind of community aspect to it. They all get together. Some of them fish for generations. So they're involved in fishing through their life and through generations. And it's really a family affair, different members of the family involved in different fishing related tasks. And so, yeah, it's really such a crucial part of lives for so many people.
Yeah, from Maine to the Baltic Sea and the English Channel to Belize, Madagascar, and Fiji, I've had the pleasure to meet with people who have generations of family members fishing at a particular fishing ground on top of a particular reef for a particular species. And some of them can see a different life because this is what they know, this is what they want to do, this brings joy, there's a sense of purpose to be able to nurture their families, their communities, and their country. And then others wants to transfer out of it, right? Want to go into the tourism industry or find a different job, get an education somewhere, and maybe go work for the fisheries department of their country. The point here is that just like agriculture, fisheries and fishing is a family and a community affair. And that's also important because at the end of the day, if we get the joy and the commitment from those who take advantage of the oceans, if we get them bought into good management and good protections, that's equally important as a decision made by some government somewhere in a fancy building in a capital. So both these things are really important.
Fantastic. And before we move on to discussing some of the tools and solutions related to this topic, I just want to set the scene a little bit. So, what are some historical examples of conflict that has arisen from fishing disputes, particularly examples of transnational conflict?
I will just flag generally that a lot of the conflicts arise from claims over resources, right? So you might have nations with competing claims over specific territory. You also might have a situation where fishers use different types of fishing techniques, and perhaps some techniques are very destructive to fish resources. And so those fishing boats might actually come into your territory, or might be coming in and overfishing in your waters with those very large-scale destructive types of fishing gear. And so that can certainly present problems. But Johan probably has specific examples he can mention.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right, Sophia, what you're mentioning there. Sebastian, all of these conflict instances, they take place at all sorts of levels, from community levels in coastal regions where there is dispute over a particular fishing ground, all the way up to the regional level where countries believe that they should have access or have had access to particular fisheries, to the global and the geopolitical level where great powers, even superpowers, are investing in fishing fleets and licensing agreements and infrastructure to be able to gain access to countries' fishing grounds. And these all causes friction between governments and the private sector, between individual members of the community and the community. And this is a powder keg because it has all of the characteristics of a very dangerous scenario where we have increase in people who will depend on seafood. We have decreased seafood, and there's a history of conflict over this commodity. And the best, least known data point, I think, perhaps in the history of the world, is that 25% of all conflicts between democracies during the Cold War was actually over fish. And it's remarkable that more resources and more political attention is not paid to this particular issue, not necessarily because of the health of the ocean, although I'd like that to happen, but to be a stabilizing force. So we don't have local, regional, and global conflict over commodity that is decreasing as population growth is going through the roof for the next 20, 30 years. So yeah, it is everywhere, and it's getting worse.
Well, that's a pretty staggering statistic to think about. 25% of all conflict between democracies during the Cold War. Something that it brings to my mind, and I'm not sure how related it would be, but it makes me think of the conflict that's arising over claims on water on the Amazon River between Colombia and Peru right now. They're disputing which portion of the river belongs to which country. So there's definitely examples of this everywhere and arising both at diplomatic levels, but also at smaller scale, right?
You mentioned such a good point about dynamics that are critical to manage. So in this scenario, right, there would have probably been predictive opportunities that this would become a potential conflict zone over a resource. And so that's really the intent of some of the work that we are doing at WWF, I'm sure at ELI. Instead of being constantly on our back feet with conflict or mismanagement over resources, we're trying to look ahead and say, what are the dynamics that will impact and escalate conflict over fish or any resource, really? And in addition to some of the things we've talked about, and Sophia mentioned some of these dynamics, and I just want to reiterate it because I thought it was really well summarized. But we look at stock health. Are they going up or are they going down? And how likely are they to recover? fish stocks are pretty good to recover, but how well are they going to recover? And then you look at, is there a history of border disputes in the sovereign, terrestrial, and maritime lines, or new borders like a marine protected area? So that needs to be put into a data model. And then we look at things like, is there a history of conflict over other non-fishing related commodities? That's going to impact how the world views and experiences conflict. And then, of course, are foreign nations fishing in other nations' exclusive economic zones? And is the governance capacity there? All of these dynamics and the data that one can extract from them, we have put into a model that tells us where the future fisheries conflicts are. And when we have that, we can partner up with others and say, here's the type of capacity and management that we need in order to avoid sort of the most destructive future. So you've really been able to crystallize what is needed here, not only to view it happen, but to prevent this dystopian future, if you will.
Thank you, Johan. That's a good transition to talking a little bit more about the World Wildlife Fund's Oceans Futures platform. Do you want to tell us a little more about that?
So yeah, happy to. So I just reviewed with you sort of what type of data, analytics, and brain power goes into not trying to see what has been, but really trying to predict what will be. And with that information, an early warning system, if you will, being able to rally a broader community of actors, all of which have equities, everything from navies and coast guards of the world, all the way to marine natural resource managers and everyone in between. And so we took a look at this, put an early version of this program into the field, and you can all find that at oceansfutures.org and get in touch with bespoke and other analysis that we're happy to offer in partnership with ELI and others. But really, we found some remarkable areas that scares us a little bit, the Arctic being one of them. The Arctic sort of has all of the characteristics of a region that is not looking great from a fisheries conflict point of view. There is a history of fisheries conflict there. We just looked at the last couple of years. It's over 150 fisheries-related conflicts up there. And even more worrisome, perhaps, is that this is an area where we'll have more abundance of fish because of climate-related fisheries migration. And so it is likely that countries and communities will compete even more aggressively for fish stocks up in the Arctic. And finally, as you all know, sea ice is receding quickly up in the Arctic, which will open up new natural resources. And when new natural resources becomes available, the countries, communities, companies are going to try to lay claim and source those resources. So these are a number of areas where that we are watching closely. And one of the things that I think is amazing with ELI is that you have such depth on legal and regulatory changes that needs to happen as the world emerges. So the work that you're doing is going to be absolutely critical to how to fix these future threats.
And Johan, I do have a question. Now that you have identified those potential places of conflict, what is the plan? What is WWF going to do?
The plan is to put together management plans, resources, and opportunities for a much broader community to engage. Now when we know it's not just a slow bleed of the world's fish going away, but as it is going away and as it is moving, there is societal risks to food, jobs, and even conflict between nations and communities. So we hope that that will stimulate a different conversation and a different resource base to actually prevent some of the risks that we've identified.
Thank you, Johan. Sofia, from a legal perspective, how can you begin to plan ahead for these disputes, and how could a tool such as the Oceans Futures platform be used by governments, NGOs, or international bodies?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sebastian. So from a legal perspective, there is a number of things that
one should consider. One, it's important to claim rights to your ocean space. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea allows countries to claim up to 200 nautical miles as an exclusive economic zone for the exploitation and management of natural resources. It's also important to designate areas and rights for fisheries in the law, explaining who can use the fishery, in what way, and for what purpose. And it's important to have clear boundaries that are free of conflict or claims of others, so there is no confusion. Internationally, if there are any territorial claims, it's useful to resolve them and address them in bilateral agreements to avoid conflict down the line. It's also very important for countries to enforce their laws. Of course, in order to successfully enforce the law, you need to know what's happening within the ocean space. And there are various technology tools and platforms available nowadays that can increase maritime awareness, identify suspicious vessels and suspicious activities on the water, and support law enforcement personnel. Many of these maritime awareness tools are free and can be used by governments, as well as NGOs, international bodies, and others.
I just reinforce what Sofia just said, which is that fish is going to move, period. And what we will need is an updated infrastructure around that. And I think it goes in 5 areas. We need a new or updated legal and regulatory system. Sofia just spoke about that. We need an increased ability to monitor what is happening as part of that new regulatory and legal framework. Then that will inform the management of fish stocks or areas in need of updating. And then you have enforcement and deterrence. But it really starts with getting the right data and the right actionable insights. And to do it in a preventive manner is mission critical here. So we don't witness the destruction or talk about the destruction, but actually talk about how we can further stocks, how we can decrease conflict, how we can make sure that we protect the right places, which is not only the fish stocks, by the way, those are the spawning grounds and nurseries, many of which are in so-called blue forest, mangroves, seaweed, seagrass. And so there's a lot of components that our community and the community beyond ours is going to have to update when the conditions of the oceans change. And it's time to get busy.
I couldn't agree more. One of the things that Johan has mentioned that's so right is for fisheries managers to keep track of data, to collect the data and analyze it, to see what is happening to the stocks. Are they moving? Where are they moving? Is there less fish available? Because that will dictate rules for fisheries. Fisheries grounds may need to be moved. There might be changes to fishing quotas and other limitations. There might be new rules on the type of fish that could be fished in a specific area. So all of those things need to be kept in mind. And of course, we need data to be provided to fisheries managers. And there is so much technology now available that makes it easier for fishers to report it and makes it easier for fisheries managers to get the data and analyze it. There is also a legal component. Laws should address how the data is collected and what's done with the data. And there are many parts of the enforcement legal framework that are addressed with regard to fisheries as well.
This is such an important point, Sofia. I think in many respects, governments, investors, private sector, and even fisher folk to some extent no longer have the excuse that it is hard to collect and manage data. 10, 15 years ago, that was probably the case. Today, with space-based remote sensing, with surface vehicle or surface platforms and subsea platforms that can harness energy from the water columns or from waves or from solar, has the ability to, in a fairly cost-effective manner, collect the type of data on fisheries and others that Sofia just mentioned. And now you overlay that with some really powerful artificial intelligence. You can really have real-time understanding about how your stocks are doing, the trajectory of them, and subsequently what actions that you need to take politically, economically, from a marine resource management point of view to have the trajectory be in the right direction. And is it expensive still? Yes. But is it as expensive as it was 10, 15 years ago when a lot of these technologies were starting to come online? Absolutely not. And I think that's one of the bright spots in some of the challenges that Sofia and I have been discussing today is that we actually can monitor and as a result manage one of the most important commodities that exists today, which is seafood.
And some of the technologies are free. Some of the platforms available are free that help identify foreign vessels, suspicious activity, etc. But yeah, absolutely. Some of the technology is free and some of the technology is low cost. So it should be available for people who want to use it.
I know with my own experience on the oceans team, there are some challenges, though, to implementing these technologies that go beyond financial viability, right? Did you want to talk a little bit about those potential additional challenges that are inhibiting some countries from implementing the technologies that can help?
Oftentimes, it's the capacity and resources. In smaller countries, you might have only several individuals who are in charge of collecting and analyzing data about stocks. you might have only a couple of personnel who are supposed to help kind of identify vessels. Fuel is getting expensive, so you don't necessarily have live patrol, and so you need to rely more on technology. There is also a lot of rotation, I feel. We hear a lot about, some individuals get trained and then there is rotation, they leave, someone else comes in. So some countries are experiencing that gap in knowledge or inconsistency in training. And, there are financial considerations, of course. As I mentioned, some of the resources are free, but some of those resources are low cost or some of the higher cost. A lot of countries are using drones. Well, those are still expensive for some countries more than others. For some other technology, like vessel monitoring systems, for example, you really need to make sure that people who are using those devices are on board with using them. Some of the small-scale fisher communities not necessarily want to be tracked, or they're suspicious about others who want to know where they fish. There are some fishing grounds that they feel they want to keep secret from others. So there are all different kinds of considerations when it comes to technology. But then in some cases, it's really a matter of privacy. Then, it can be resolved, where the data goes, who has access to data. And so in some cases, explaining how the technology works and alleviating some of the concerns really helps implementing the technology.
Great, thank you. And I kind of want to focus in a little bit on this prospective increase in fish-driven maritime conflict as a result of moving and changing fish stocks. Beyond what we've already talked about, what are some other possible solutions or approaches for resolving illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing issues, considering these changes? And if you could provide any examples of policies that are maybe already pursuing related solutions.
Yeah, look, I can make two specific suggestions, but just to frame those a little bit, the United States has the best fisheries in the world. It's because we've spent resources and science and capacity and recognize how important this particular commodity is to us for all of the reasons that we have discussed in terms of food and jobs and stability and conservation. So the first thing I guess I'll say is that if you want to see a good example of how it should work, the United States is a pretty darn good example of that. And it could be a great American export to other countries as part of an agenda to seek well-functioning relationships with other nations on issues that is near and dear to their heart. And you'll be surprised the amount of time you go into a country anywhere in the world and you ask them what their top priority is. A lot of times that's like management of their agricultural and their marine environment. And so that's the first point. The second point I'll say is that the world's security organizations, who has the vast majority of the resources to further peace, prosperity, and stability in this world, has a stake in working with marine resource managers to make sure that laws are enforced and that we have an adequate deterrence to countries and communities and organizations who is trying to steal other countries' resources. So changing the authority in terms of who can engage and what resources can be used to build law enforcement around the world on this issue, I think is a second game changer. And then third, which happened a couple of weeks ago, the Global Commons, that is the high seas, has a treaty now, a treaty that is supposed to be putting smart marine protected areas in the area beyond countries' exclusive economic zone. If we do that right, taking into consideration some of the things that me and Sofia has been talking today, that would be an amazing policy and regulatory framework to further the countering of IUU fishing and other maritime crimes. So I think those three areas are really game-changing and shifting opportunities to a more positive future when it comes to managing and monitoring fish stocks.
I also want to add something. There is an increased collaboration between different agencies that are responsible for enforcement on the water. And those are like, Coast Guard, fisheries, customs, other related agencies. Basically, they're all in the water to pursue different goals, right? They have different laws that empower them with different responsibilities. But they collaborate now, they might have an MOU in place. memorandum of understanding or some other legal mandate to make sure that they collaborate and share data, and in some cases even share powers, so that if one agency stops, or becomes aware of a crime and another agency usually has to deal with, that agency either alerts that other agency or it might have powers actually to stop the crime or charge the violator. In addition to kind of internal collaborations, we also see some collaborations with neighbor states. And so there might be like a regional effort to share data, share intelligence, share strategies, share information about vessels, and assist each other in prosecuting violators, including illegal fishing. And so those efforts, I think, are really important. It's really important for the country to use the information and share it with others to make sure that IUU becomes less prevalent on the waters.
Okay, so then to start wrapping things up and speaking in broad terms, what are some things that gives you hope that we will be able to reduce some of these risks to our oceans and protect these vital resources for future generations?
Right. So, well, I think it's important for countries to understand what's happening within the waters. And I think we hammer these points to the ground at this time, but it's really important. And it's also very important for them to strengthen their fisheries enforcement laws. This includes addressing in the laws the use of technology, including what technology can be used, how it's used, who's using it, how data obtained through such technology can be used as evidence in court, for example, or what penalties are used in what situations. This also includes making sure that the responsibilities of relevant agencies are clearly defined in the law, that enforcement officers have the powers they need to implement the law. So whether it's sharing information with someone else or stopping and having additional duties when you stop the vessel, that all should be very clearly articulated in the law. Additional provisions that address regional collaborations can be addressed through bilateral agreements. And one thing we've noticed is that there is actually a movement to revise fisheries laws right now. We see more and more countries trying to address the different aspects in their legislation. And so this is something that we help with. This is something, we write guides on this, and we sometimes work directly with countries to help them strengthen the legislation to make sure that they can use the technology and data that's now available and that's still admissible in court. And the people who need to use this data have the language in the law that describes how they're going to be using it, so they can successfully use the technology.
Thank you. Look, I think that there's plenty of opportunities to be hopeful here if you look at it in a broader historical perspective. I get really hopeful when I see members of our team, marine biologists, oceanographers, subject matter experts, regional experts, and members of the broader ocean and conservation community being able to make a stronger scientific and data-driven case for why conservation matters. And it matters because it brings food to our tables, it brings jobs to our families, it brings economic stability. And I must believe that some of the positive changes that is happening in policy, laws, capacity building, or broader interest across a wider set of communities, that it has something to do that ocean conservationists are doing a better job today than 10 years ago to make the case for why it matters and what the amazing economic security, safety, and personal benefits. So I think we're heading in the right direction here now. We have the solutions. We just need to hammer political awareness and the resource drum to give us a chance to deliver ocean conservation for the planet, for people, for prosperity and peace and security.
Another thing I'd like to mention here is that I think there is more realization now that once a resource is destroyed, not only we can't enjoy it, but also some people can no longer have economic benefits from that resource, right? So scuba diving or some other things. And so that becomes a real concern, I think. I was talking to some experts in European countries that have lost some of the habitats, and they're really struggling to revive them, to restore those habitats, and it's very, very difficult. And so I think there is more understanding that we need to be very careful about how we approach our ocean activities, but also activities on the shore that can affect the ocean ecosystem, because ultimately we're hurting ourselves with our activities. And once the resource is lost, again, it's very difficult. It's sometimes impossible to revive it back. And that, again, is not only loss to the ecosystem, it's loss for our enjoyment, and we're no longer able to benefit from it. Less tourism, there is less other activities. And so hopefully, as people become more aware of that and start using solutions that are currently available, there is a change in a trend and more people are interested in preserving ocean ecosystems, and there is more ecosystem being preserved.
Great. Thank you both for sharing some of those concluding thoughts. And before I let you both go, I just wanted to give an opportunity to highlight some of the wonderful work that's being done both at the World Wildlife Fund as well as here at ELI. So, Johan, starting with you, can you maybe tell us a little bit about how you see WWF's Oceans Futures platform evolving, what role you hope it's going to play in shaping global response, as well as anything else that WWF is working on that you'd like to share with us today?
Absolutely. I am so proud about the entire WWF network. On the ocean side, we work in places in seascape at scale, bringing marine protected areas, management plans, enforcement capabilities, a deep connection to community conservation to make sure that the people who are the stewards of the front lines of conservation have not only a say, but a significant and clear role in how we move this forward at the local, regional, and global level. So that's number one. Number two, unless we drive finances to this area of work, it's not going to work, which is why we have an amazing blue finance team here at WWF and a markets team that work with companies to mitigate the most destructive practices, as well as showing the world what it means to be on a nature positive business journey. And then number three, as we've talked about over the last few minutes here, we are looking at what does it mean to predict the future in terms of where future risk and opportunities lie when it comes to fisheries and other important resilience dynamics. And I'm really hopeful that with early warning systems driven by science's data, we can build a bigger coalition of partners and resources to actually get the job done for the planet and for the people who are inhabited it. So I think that the WWF, in partnership with others, has a real chance over the next few years to make a significant dent in the challenges that we're facing.
Great. Thank you, Johan. And Sofia, from a legal and policy perspective, what are some of the important opportunities you see, and how does ELI's work fit into these opportunities?
Yeah, so we are very lucky to be able to work pretty much across the world. I was just thinking about the projects we've done this last year, and they're really all over different regions in different countries. It's really important for countries, as I mentioned, to make sure they have strong legislation in place. And this is something ELI helps with. So we create guides and we work directly with countries around the world and create reports as well about how things are happening to help countries improve their fisheries laws, the MPA enforcement law, so MPA laws, and make sure that they have a strong legal framework in place to have effective enforcement in the waters. One thing ELI does very well, I think, is we take concepts, there are new approaches or new concepts, and we figure out what would it look like in a law? What do we need in a legal framework to make sure that that concept works? And what are some of the approaches and models that might exist out there that will work in different situations? Because there is not one approach for every country, right? Every country is unique, and you might have different approaches that work for the same country for different communities. And so one thing ELI does very well is trying to assess how to make sure that the law addresses this new approach or new concept, and what are some of the parts or elements of that approach, and how should they be addressed in the law. And so we talked a lot about fish migrating. We talked a lot about challenges with enforcement. ELI, I think, can help very well with those challenges and help countries improve their legal frameworks.
Thanks, Sofia. That's a great overview of how ELI is helping countries to strengthen their legal frameworks. And Johan, I know you had an announcement to share that ties directly into some of the themes that we've been discussing. Do you want to tell us more about that?
We have talked a whole lot about, I'd say, some untraditional marine conservation issues. Both Sofia and I have spoken about its implications for geopolitics, security, economic prosperity. And I think that there's an important need to educate ourselves more about what that strategic narrative looks like and what the blueprint for change must look like. And so WWF is really proud to have recently released a study that we call the Geopolitics of Oceans. And you can find that on our website if you're interested in digging deeper into that and join the cross-functional community that understands that ocean health is part of the national security conversation.
Great. Thank you both for joining me today. It was wonderful having this conversation with you. I know I definitely learned a lot about the geopolitical implications of all these oceans issues, and I'm sure our listeners will too.
Yes, this has been wonderful. Thank you very much, Johan. And thank you, Sebastian, for having me on this podcast.
Sebastian and Sofia, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation and the spirited exchange. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to People, Places, Planet, the official podcast of the Environmental Law Institute. Our work wouldn't be possible without the support of people like you. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, attend one of our events, or support our work financially, head to eli.org.